Greetings from Castle Goring from Mickey Aurora. And from me, Aurora looks as if she wants to give me a lips kiss. Aurora fortunately doesn't understand that she must never give me a tongue, just the brushings of a kiss. So lips don't even meet. She loves giving me lips kisses. Yes, Aurora, yes. Well, we have a lot of ground to cover today and very interesting subjects to cover. Really interesting and some quite momentous subjects to cover, which I have to say is a relief from the unrelenting saga of the two dunderheads. But before getting on to any of that, I will plunge in with what Book Reader says. Lady C, what do you make of the remarks Craig Brown attributes to the Queen about Donald Trump in his latest book? We're starting off on a very light note, with a very lightweight matter that has far-reaching consequences potentially. Craig Brown is a British writer. He's an old Etonian. He and his wife, Frances Welsh, are quite well connected media-wise and old Etonian-wise. She wrote an interesting little book on the Romanovs leaving on the HMS Marlborough from the Crimea. He wrote a book on Princess Margaret, which had Anne Glenconner frothing at the mouth with its inventions and inaccuracies. Now, I'm not going to say that Craig Brown is making up the stuff, but I do think that whoever his sources are superb embroiderers, and he is happy to repeat that which has been embroidered. I don't for a second believe a word of it. If you know anything about their political affiliations, you will know why he would have been happy to repeat a canard which, quite frankly, I am reliably informed by people from the palace is totally untrue, that actually the Queen enjoyed her visit with, two visits actually, with Donald Trump. Yes, she thought he was unusual, but she certainly did not speak about him in the pejorative terms that Craig Brown has attributed in his book that she spoke about Donald Trump in. Interesting, isn't it, that the only person that Craig Brown can come up with that the Queen said anything against in terms of world leaders was Donald Trump, who's running for re-election. I leave you with that thought and won't belabor the point further. It's not a book I will be buying. My opinion of Craig Brown is that he is of absolutely no significance as a writer, and that anybody who wastes their money to buy his books deserves to read the rubbish. Bessie Tav says, Delhi, oh no, sorry, I jumped the gun. CBH says, Mike Lynch's ex-aide was run over and killed a few days earlier. Coincidence? This is referring to the fact that Mike Lynch, whose company Autonomy was taken over by Hewlett-Packard, and then spent 13 years in the American justice system before being exonerated in June. And of course, there was the awful tragedy of his wonderful boat, the Bayesian, sinking outside of Palermo. Actually, I think it's Porticello, but anyway, very near to Palermo in Italy off the Sardinian coast. And his co-defendant was coincidentally run down and killed while jogging. Now, I'm taking this one first because we're going to go into the Mike Lynch disaster more fully in the next bit of this question. Is it a coincidence? Well, let's remember Freud said there's no such thing as a coincidence, but Freud said an awful lot that has turned out to be inaccurate. Was it a coincidence? It is possible that it is a coincidence. Going off what I am hearing from my Italian collections, they don't believe any of it is coincidental. They believe that certain nostras have been involved, but that could just be the desire to explain away two bizarre incidents. But we will get to that in a moment. So do I think it is coincidence? I have always believed in opting for the ordinary over the extraordinary explanation of any problem or any conundrum. And only when the ordinary turns out to be inaccurate does one move on to the extraordinary. So I suppose you could say in the first and second instances, I am not a conspiracy theorist. However, that doesn't mean that conspiracies don't exist and that conspiracy theories don't turn out to be true. I make that point for what it's worth. And now I will plunge in with what Bessie Tav says. Dear Lady C, I pick up on the Bayesian tragedy. I live in Italy, and it has been all over the news as well, although we knew nothing of the guests, since none of them is known in Italy. And I would like to know your opinion on this tragedy. That is, it has been reported on our news that it might not be a tragedy after all. We had a similar case on Lake Como a few summers ago. It seemed a tragedy, but at the end of the day, it came out that the boat was hosting a party of Italian and Israeli 007s. Do you think there might have been someone interested in the Bayesian tragedy? Thank you. Now, I do not want to trivialize a genuine tragedy. I've had enough genuine tragedies in my life. For instance, my grandfather's murder when I was 13 and a half years old was the first. And there have been several others. And I don't want to trivialize the Lynch's family and the other families' tragedy by speculating needlessly. However, this is a huge news story, and it does deserve examination. My own instinct in the first instance and I want you to listen to how carefully I word all of this, is that it is coincidental, the co-defendant being run down and knocked over by a car while jogging could be coincidental, could be an accident. One thing that is beyond dispute is that it is a water spout that caused the tragedy of the Bayesian sinking. Without the water spout, there would have been no sinking of the Bayesian. We need to bear that in mind. Now, I'm sorry, no nostra, whether it is cosa or otherwise. No fia, whether it is ma or otherwise. No vengeance, whether it is Hewlett or Packard or disaffected investors or otherwise, can create a water spout. A water spout is a natural phenomenon. There is no doubt that the boat was hit by a water spout. There is photographic evidence of it. In my opinion, because I was asked another question that these have superseded, and the question I was asked was, since it's well known that I charter yachts and go on cruises, what was my take on why the Bayesian sank? And I think it's appropriate to mention that question because my take really hasn't altered, notwithstanding the fact that I have been getting reports from friends of mine about what's been said in Italy. Over the weekend, a friend of mine who's got links to Italy was telling me that in Italy, everybody is agog with the fact that this is not a mere accident or tragedy. So it's not a total surprise to me. There are distinct differences between the Lake Como incident and the sinking of the Bayesian, chief of which is the water spout. That is nobody's invention, and nobody could have created that. That's well worth bearing in mind. My take on it is simple. Now, people often sleep on deck. In fact, the young mother with her 1-year-old baby, she was sleeping on deck. When we go on cruises, some of the people sleep on deck. One of my children invariably sleeps on deck with 1 or 2 friends, and the other doesn't. I never sleep on deck. I sleep in a cabin. Because the cabins are hot. When it's hot, the cabins get hot. Everybody keeps their portholes open to let in the cool air. In a sudden change of weather conditions, as happened with the water spout, there's no time to close the portholes. Also, on some boats, but not all boats, they will keep other access points open because the weather, the sea is as still as the parched plains in the prairies. So there's no waves, there's nothing to worry about. But if you have a sudden incident like the water spout, where it churns up the sea, temporarily raises the sea level, you're in big trouble. It only takes a certain amount of ingress of water from varying points to sink a boat, especially a boat that's only 180 something feet. Now, it's a big boat for a private boat, but it's not that big a boat. I mean, the Titanic sank because it had sprung rivets and tears along the hull, but they were minor tears. But it doesn't matter. If there are enough, you will have a rapid ingress of water, and the force of the water is infinitely greater than the tensile strength of the hull. So it's going to let in the water wherever it's coming in from, but the hull was strong enough that it has not shattered, but the boat sank very quickly. There is also the possibility that, and it seems almost likely, that the force of the wind unbalanced the boat with the mast. Whether the mast cracked or not, the boat tilted onto its side due to the force of the wind pushing it onto its side. And because I bet it emerges that the portholes were open, which meant that the water then flooded in. If there were any other access points that were open, which is very possible, if not likely, where, for instance, the chef would have a gangplank, so to speak, for the delivery of food. If that had been open, the water would have flooded into that as well, because the sea level would have risen dramatically quickly, and it would have been like pouring water into it. And once that happens, it tips over, and it all happened very quickly. Now, the young lady whose child was rescued, she says she was sleeping on deck. That's why they were saved. Mrs. Lynch clearly got out of bed to see what was going on, and she ended up being saved. And I think it's going to emerge that all survivors, with the possible exception of the chef, we don't yet know why the chef died, whether he drowned or whether something hit him, we don't know. I mean, in the turmoil, and this happened in a matter of minutes, there is the visual proof that the boat sank in about a minute or two. I don't see how that could have been orchestrated. What could have been orchestrated, if you want to go down the conspiracy theory lines, and I personally don't at this point. I don't believe in conspiracy theories unless the evidence is irrefutable in that direction. That, of course, in Italy, they are saying that one of the crew opened up the hatches. But I don't see how possible that is, that things could have been opened up so quickly, because they were taking a chance on their life as well. Now, of course, in Italy, there are all sorts of theories. Well, if you've got the mafia after you, and you've got blah, 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 da, 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 and they're going to hold somebody and force you to do. I mean, it's bizarre. I'm not saying that the bizarre doesn't happen, but I'm saying that in my opinion, it's that the portholes and maybe some of the hatches were open because it was an absolutely still night. And nobody could have expected that there would have been such a catastrophic event as it's a tornado at sea, and it tears through at the rate of knots. So I hope that answers the question. Linda Passier says, an American hair. How does the king take any action against Meghan and Harry without it coming across as racist? In this world we have. Linda Passier, very good question. I would actually have said it's an observation rather than a question. And I know that people are yearning for an immediate solution, but I think that Harry and Meghan, every time they open up their mouths, every time they do anything, they are undermining themselves. They are losing supporters. They are showing the world how ridiculous and, quite frankly, crackers they are. Also, the king has really other important things on his plate at this moment. That is not to say that at some point something of some significance might not be done. But I agree with you. Unless it is something, I said it all along in terms of even in my first Meghan and Harry book, there needs to be something criminal or something. I would actually hedge that bet now by saying that could be constituted as criminal or approaching criminality that could induce such a dramatic course of action. It's a political hot potato. It's a racial hot potato. Why would the king and the crown, I can see why the government would do it, but I can't see why the crown and the king would do it. So, at least not unless there was something else happening that made it essential for him to do so. Let's watch this space. But I think I prefer to go with my line of reasoning, which all along has been adhere to reason and don't go down the punitive road. They're giving them enough rope to hang themselves with, and they are making fabulous gibbets from which they swing. Elaine Perrott says, if anyone wants to see what a real royal visit looks like, watch King Charles, who interrupted his holiday to travel quietly down from Scotland to Southport to express his sympathies to the families of the 3 little girls who were done away with by a very sick young man during a Taylor Swift-themed dance class, the other injured children and adults, and the emergency services. He walked alone into the street to view the flowers and other offerings and shook hands with the crowd. No speech, no intrusive security, men or media close by, just expressions of heartfelt sympathy, along with private meetings with those worst affected. That's what real working royals do. That's right. Thank you very much for that, Elaine Perrott. That is exactly what working royals do. They are embodiments of the nation, and they are there to provide succor and service where it is needed. And he has done a very good job of it. Christos Liakis says, Dear Lady C, while we're on the topic of the so-called romance of the century, waning, there are pictures about of Has completely ignoring Megs and displaying himself in the direction of a clearly uncomfortable brunette sitting to his left. It may just be him being an uncultivated oik for the millionth time, but do you think that given his instability, his dependence on having a woman that Meg's very much enhanced, the irony, and likely delusion that he's a player, he's willing to jump headfirst into a new flame's arms, away from the controversies and alleged hysterics of the creature he married? I love it. Christos Liakis, thank you very much. Colombia is a wonderful place, isn't it? If you are the emotional type and you are going to be led with your head, whether upper or lower is beside the point, the likelihood is you're going to do that time and again. Yes, Harry gave away the fact, unconsciously, I suspect, that he is open to other feminine company, and that he was very comfortable with this very attractive brunette girl to his left. And he put his arm around the back of her chair, which, it has to be said, only a swine or a very confident man, confident in his desirability, but with not sufficient grace as to wait for a green light from a girl. Well, maybe there was a green light before and we didn't see it. So it's very oikish behaviour, but it gives a lot away about how he functions. Now, I know that he functions on a very atavistic level. And he clearly was functioning on a very atavistic level. When he's comfortable, he shows it. He shows it. And he indicated that he was really open to being familiar with a girl in public, in front of everybody else. And she had to sit up to avoid the discomfort of him embracing her. Very interesting. Let us wait and see what happens, because in a marriage that's very up and down, and where there are significant difficulties, is he going to jump? I know that he has for some time now had squalls maritally, and he tried to really reconnect with his British friends. The problem is nobody wants to reconnect with him while he is still with Meghan. It's too chancy. You know, it's the healthy trying to avoid, let me put it in biblical terms. You're outside of the leper colony. Harry's inside of the leper colony. He doesn't seem to have leprosy, but he's got a boil or two. Are you going to host him in your house? Especially when he keeps on running beyond the border of the leper colony, then back into the arms of his leper. I think that explains why people don't want to re-embrace him. But will he want to re-embrace somebody, and will he? And also, will he have the strength of character if he is embraced by someone whom he has embraced outside of that marriage? Is he going to have the strength to disconnect from bindweed because she has him wrapped up like bindweed? I think these are all academic matters that, unless you're a fortune teller, which I'm not, or you are reckless, which I'm not, it does not behoove you to speculate upon too greatly. LKDS says, Dear Lady C, do you have any word on Harry's state of mind, please? Whilst I agree with the Times piece that he's a very angry boy, I can't help but feel sorry for him, a vulnerable man who was tricked into believing this woman was head over heels in love with him, that they were soulmates, when all she truly cared for was what he could offer. He must see social media posts and videos and notice her bad and most often very odd behaviour. It depends how hooked he is. My understanding is that the scales have to an extent fallen off his eyes, but he's still there. He's still collusive. So he's not made the leap yet. Whether he's ready to or not, he's not made it yet. And that would tell me he's not ready to make it yet. So his state of mind, evidently he's very angry and very volatile and very disenchanted and very confused and very tied up in knots, which is inevitable in a situation like that. I don't pity him. I sympathize with him, because even though he has invited in the viper and allowed it to savage him and everybody else close to him, I really do feel he was after love and thought he'd got it. Very sad, very disillusioning. And my understanding is that he is torn. He's torn. Let's wait and see what happens, how torn he is. But you only need to look at their body language to see that basically the gild is truly off the lily. The disdain that they look at each other with is quite astonishing. Tunip says, I wonder if they realize how many people can see right through the acting. I have no idea how Harry does it. I think he knows more than she does that people can see through the acting. He's, believe it or not, more earthed than she is. Now that says something, doesn't it? My understanding is that he has some insight into what's going on and what the public perceptions of them are. She has either has none or doesn't care, or is a combination of the two. I am beginning to think she is truly nuts, because that degree of self-delusion is insanity. At least that's the indication she gives. Uncensored Texan says, "Dear Lady C, may you enlighten us on a particular subject. If Meghan had a surrogate, her children don't look anything like her. The only genes are of Harry's only. The mother's genes possibly not Meghan's, but of a Caucasian woman, safe to say. Then the Oprah interview of how dark the baby's skin colour could be. Could this possibly be the evil the late Queen Elizabeth II was referring to? Could you please shed light on this?" Well, for legal reasons, Uncensored Texan, I need to point out that this is very much speculation on your part as a result of the various subjects that have arisen as a result of Meghan's conduct during her pregnancy and all that has emerged since. No. Now, I know as a fact that while the late Queen was alive, the subject of the surrogacy was discussed. I cannot say how I know that the subject of the surrogacy was discussed, beyond saying that I had a small part to play in it. I don't want to say more than that. It would be injudicious of me at this point to say more than that. Whether Meghan used a surrogate or not, the fact that the subject of her possibly using a surrogate arose altogether was entirely due to her conduct. So whether, and I'm choosing my words very carefully for legal reasons, whether a surrogate was used or by her conduct she implied the possibility of a surrogate being used when a surrogate was not used, either scenario is sufficiently damaging, destructive, insane, really, and irresponsible that anybody concerned would think, my goodness, what on earth is going, how could this be happening? Now, I think it's Cara Kennedy in The Spectator who said that the Queen had used the word evil. She didn't use it to me, and she didn't use it to anybody I know. So I am going to go with the word that she used, that I know she used, which was that Meghan is a wicked girl. The two things pretty much mean the same thing, but I will go with what I know to be certainty. Does the surrogacy play a part in the late Queen's opinion that Meghan was a wicked girl? I think the whole performance, the whole way she has conducted herself, the whole way she came into the family, the way she was embraced, the way she twisted and turned and fabricated and willfully misinterpreted every act of kindness to be an act of cruelty. I don't think it's only the fact of the surrogacy story and the questions, be even better to put it this way. I don't think it's the fact of the questions arising from Meghan's conduct that have led to the questions of surrogacy being the only thing that the Queen regarded as destructive. But yes, I do agree that the surrogacy would have been a part of it because the Queen knew about it before she died. I leave it at that for the moment. Old Coach says, I have genuinely thought Meghan Markle is truly insane for some times, not only you, my dear. And Isabella says, I am convinced that Megan is insane. I just can't imagine why she would behave that way otherwise. These are just two of the many comments along those lines. There is no doubt in my mind, going off Meghan's behaviour, that she is either clinically insane or then she is clinically maladjusted to the extent that she exhibits a host of personality problems tantamount to a cocktail of personality disorders. That is my considered opinion, having studied personality disorders to write the book Daughter of Narcissus. I'm not speaking as somebody who is totally ignorant on the subject, because aside from having lived with another lunatic who also exhibited narcissistic, Machiavellian, histrionic personality, antisocial personality traits, I have studied the subject to have been able to write the book, and to write the book with the accuracy that I did. And I would defy any medical expert on the subject to find my assessment and my understanding of the subject lacking in any significant way. So, something's radically wrong. Radically wrong. Let me put it like that. Whether it's insanity or personality disorder or a combination of the two, her conduct exhibits the classical signs of somebody who just doesn't function within the parameters that healthy people regard as sane. Let's leave it at that. A. Carroll says, their fake loved up act did not fool anyone. Remember Jane Pauley's interview? That's how they really are. I agree. And my understanding is that their relationship is extremely volatile and that they have humdingers. Let's leave it at that. And that he has had the scales falling off his eyes and that he is not happy. As I say, whether he will have the character, the backbone, the gumption to act upon it is something else again. Vera Turner says, Lady C, I can tell you for a fact from someone who had direct contact with the duo that they were instructed to address Harry as His Royal Highness on this latest tour. I was told that the Queen had forbidden him to do that. Yes, the Queen did forbid them to do that. But Not only does Harry insist on being addressed as His Royal Highness, but Meghan insists on being addressed as ma'am, which means that she insists upon being addressed as a Royal Highness as well. Because after you say Royal Highness, it's then ma'am or sir. Certainly, that is something that should be addressed. But everything in its own time. Responsible heads of state and responsible governments prioritize. Number 7, no matter how popular, doesn't necessarily come before number 1, 2, or 3, or 4, even if they are less popular. And many of the royal family's supporters, who have now seen through Meghan and Harry, might want this. But the royal family has to be aware of the fact that there are many people who are more neutral on the subject, more neutral on the existence of the monarchy, and then there are those who are anti. So it's not as simple and straightforward as people would like to believe. I'm not saying nothing will ever be done, but I'm just saying it's a lot harder than people seem to think. But certainly, they should not be using Royal Highness. Well, a quiet word after the horse has bolted to the stable boy. The horse is in the field going, neigh. The neighbour hears the sound. The neighbour doesn't hear the remonstration. Let's leave it at that. Wendy Terry says, I didn't see her visiting the poor children living in corrugated shelters alone and abandoned. I have seen this. They go onto the streets to earn money for food. Many end up dead. It's absolutely true. There's a tremendous amount of child poverty in Colombia. And it's not only Colombia, it's in many third world countries. Yet the government spent $2 million on Harry and Meghan's security, just so that Francia Marquez could pose as somebody who is trying to do things and using, as a woman of colour, using other women of colour. She's going to get Meghan to try to get the American president to forgive the debt, the Colombian national debt. I mean, you and I may think this is laughable, and it is laughable. But when you're dealing with very primitive people, it's amazing the rubbish that they believe. You see what I mean about playing the race card? I leave it at that. Lena Escarso says, the nauseating duo preaching cybersecurity in a country when most children cannot afford a phone or computer. A good third of the population is under the poverty line. Most children can't afford shoes to go to school. Some children share shoes. The whole thing is nauseating. But it shows how totally lacking in scruples and conscience Meghan and Harry are, that they would put before their responsibility to the impoverished people of Colombia, including the children, who need food in their bellies rather than pious words on television that they'll never see or hear. They didn't put the interests of the Colombians first. They put their own interests. They and Francia Marquez put their interests first. Cynical to the nth degree. Let's see how they try to spin this into another great success, because they've certainly had a lot of assistance from Harper's Bazaar, which of course shows the level of seriousness of the tour, that the journalist who acted as the journalist, and was churning out the pap about how fabulous Meghan looked in her endless changes of clothes, and how wonderfully received she and Harry were when they weren't, except that the few people paid to actually sit as bums on seats, or in the alternative, for instance, this poor school children tricked into thinking that they were going to be meeting a famous football star, and so they stayed behind after school and met Meghan and Harry and had no idea who they were and didn't particularly want to be there. So the whole thing is distasteful in the extreme. When officials make trips of this nature, it is to further the interests of the people concerned. Harry and Meghan make these trips to further their own interests and the interests of a narrow group of individuals who have political ambitions, and therefore squander the income of the country, which should be going towards the betterment of their citizens' lives. Do you realize how many books, how many meals, how many uniforms, how many pairs of shoes $2 million could actually end up benefiting the children of Colombia? Cyberbullying in a country where most people can't afford a phone or a computer. You see, insanity, but also not only insanity, truly destructive behaviour. And on that note, I'll say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you. Please keep the questions and comments coming in so I will know what you would like us to be speaking about. Thank you so much. Take good care. Godspeed. And if you have truly enjoyed this, would you care to like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and take good care. Bye-bye.